our normal broadcasting to be able to talk to you about a special subject. I'll be weighing in with some questions from you guys, so we'll do it all live. It'll be a fun time. Today is Christmas Eve, and I thought it'd be good to just be able to hang out. I'm in my home. I am sipping my cup of coffee, and though most of you usually come to me for gun-related content, for being able to do self-defense, home defense, all that kind of jazz, I would remind you that it is Warrior Poet Society, and the word poet denotes searching of truth and beauty, and so we not only want to be good protectors, we want to be able to really do the thing called life well and be able to succeed at it, right? So I want to weigh in on that, and if that's not your cup of tea, if you're not really caring about personal journey and betterment and open and honest discussion, you get to bail and just kind of dork out on the gun stuff, and you know what? I won't even be offended. But everyone's offended these days. Everyone is so fragile and upset, whether it's about political party affiliation, whether it's about academia, whether it's about coronavirus, or 1,000 other things people have to be deeply offended or upset. It is absolutely shocking to me that everyone just gets so upset so easily, and that's really upsetting. Tomorrow's Christmas, and as I'm leaving different stores, and I sound off with a Merry Christmas, and there's the Happy Holidays, and hey, what is Christmas really about? Those kind of things come to the surface, and then you feel like, what if I throw out the word Jesus? Is that going to make everyone feel uncomfortable? And why in the world would the name Jesus make people feel uncomfortable? Just on its face, just looking at it, if you're not like a spiritual religious person, I don't give a crap. That's totally fine. But why would people be so offended by the name Jesus? Here's a guy who he lived 2,000 years ago, and he just basically wanted to live in peace, loving other people, giving of himself, and then ultimately he died. And that was kind of the big thing. What is so offensive about a guy that just wants to live sacrificially and love? And why would it be so offensive to the rest of the world where I'm just kind of like, I'd like to be kind and loving like Jesus? Why is that so upsetting? That if you put the name of Jesus, whether it's in the halls of Congress and everyone shrieks and runs into the darkness, or whether you try to drop the name Jesus in a class, everybody freaks out as well. And I don't understand. It's kind of like, here's a collection of historical books, which may or may not be accurate or not, just like Plato or Socrates. Why can't I use this in a classroom? Now, to me, I think God actually spoke, and this is his word, but when I'm in a college classroom, I should be able to cite this as just historical documents that are collected into a book of why can't I use this in classrooms? And again, what I'm doing is a little thought experiment there. I'm not actually weighing in on my personal views on, hey, God spoke, and here it is. But people get really, really upset. I already see y'all weighing in if Bible stories are made up, and I just saw that come through. I am thrilled to be able to jump in some of those questions. So what I'll be hunting for here in the comments is I want to find the hardest questions, and just off the cuff, I want to give you what I've got on it. Many of you accuse me of being a deep thinker. Typically when I come off with something, it's not something just harebrained or left field. You guys know I'm a man of deep thought and generally broad. And thank you for all of those of you who have said that over and over and over. And I want you to just give me the benefit of the doubt that I've deeply studied whatever is a pivotal part of my belief system. So I'm ready to defend it like a lion with arguments you've never heard before. But it's nothing new. It's just not taught. So often now, it seems as we're drifting in different narratives. There's one narrative, and everyone in that echo chamber shouts that loud and clear, and nobody really understands the arguments of the other side. And that's what I feel like Christianity is in general. There is a gargantuan amount of historical empirical evidence to support the Christian worldview. Yet when I talk to atheist, agnostic counterparts or people from different religions, I am amazed by how infrequently they've ever heard of any of it. It's hard to come to a good logical conclusion when you're not dealing with all of the different pieces, all the different parts of data. So I wanted to be able to do this. myth of the, anyway. So last night I was talking with a neighbor. We went over to his house and we were just kind of talking about some, I forget how it came up, but some of the Christ myth stuff came up, and I'm able to just really crush that. And so I did. And it ended up being a really nice, cool conversation. And I found him real open-minded, and we had a great chat. And if at any time he'd be like, I don't want to talk about it, I'd be like, that's cool, we talk about whatever you want. I'm not the easily offended guy. I've got my own beliefs, and other people have their beliefs. And guess what? I'm not offended by your beliefs. Why are you so offended by just a certain name? People will bail out of this video at the drop of a hat because, oh, I don't like that name, I'm out. And I'm kind of like, man, if it's that controversial, it means it's that important. But here, let me just set the framework before I really start looking into some of these questions. And I want to be able to have a dialogue with you guys as best you can, chatting as comments are just rolling through. But I want to kind of set the picture. The year is 2020 right now. In every country you go to, whether it's the United States, it's a country over in Europe, whether it's China, North Korea, everywhere, it's 2020 years ago. And you say, well, what in the world happened 2020 years that literally time would be split in two? We were going BC, and then all of a sudden something huge happened, and now it's AD or AC, however you want to, or BCE, whatever you want to say. Something really shocking happened 2020 years ago. And when you look at that point in history, well, the Caesars had already risen. You know, that there was nothing really happening in the Greek Empire noteworthy. There's just really one thing, and it was the birth of Jesus. That's the only real big rock in the middle of history sitting there. He's a guy that split time in two and founded the world's largest religion. More books have been written about Jesus than any other person over all time. The Bible has been translated into more languages than any of all time. Jesus never held public office. He wasn't a king. He had no wealth. He didn't lead a standing army, and he never really traveled more than a few hundred miles from home. Here's a completely ordinary guy in every sense of the way of, like, he's a carpenter born from some obscure podunk town in the middle of nowhere, and yet somehow this guy flipped the world upside down. I mean, it challenged the pluralism of Rome, and ultimately the huge might of Rome, which would not be overtaken by the sword. And so at that time, the most powerful kingdom in the world would convert to Christianity, not out of force, but out of what happened with this obscure carpenter from Nazareth. It's like, how does that happen? And as you look at it, you kind of like Napoleon even looked at that. He's like, how in the world does that happen? You know, guys like me, Napoleon, have changed the world by force and armies, and that's how it always happens. But here, Jesus, you know, a grassroots preacher, rips the world in half, splits time in two. How in the world is something miraculously not tied to that? And people are always trying to worship him or kill him. And there's something amazing. There's something miraculous that must have happened. And now, as we lean into Christmas tomorrow, many folks feel bullied into not being able to talk about the most important man of all history. And maybe he was just a dude. Maybe he was just a guy. But even if he was just a guy, he should be the most important just a guy of all time. You know, it shouldn't be stigmatized like Plato. Everyone's important, and no one's offended by the name Plato or Socrates or Aristotle, Alexander the Great, or any historical personage. But when it comes to Jesus, all of a sudden you can't talk about him. No, I think he was more than a man. I think he literally was Emmanuel. God came down and made his dwelling among us and became one of us to meet us in our own filth and sin and be able to rescue us. It was a rescue operation. And so that's what in the world was going on. But why in the world people can't just, hey, let's have a chat about it, and maybe I'm wrong, but why is it so stigmatized? Why is everyone so offended so easily? It's like everyone's made of glass, and no one can just have an open conversation without everyone screaming. And now with cancel culture as well, as soon as someone starts to make a point, a lefty screams them out and never even hears them out. And so it's just really upsetting for me. Anyway, what I wanted to do is go ahead and jump into the comments now. So I am going to start reading as of now, and I'll look for something really interesting. Hey, Merry Christmas, Will sent. Let's see. All right. Sorry, bear with me just a moment. See lots of people sounding off. That's great. Fantastic. Someone asks about the Crusades and Inquisitions. The very first crusade, these would happen around the turn of the millennium, around 1,000 years after Christ. And it really looks ugly. I think about there's two villains in the Crusades and no real heroes. It's the Muslims were basically pushing conquest across Asia at the time, up through North Africa and all across Europe. And they're conquering through force Christian lands. This has been happening for hundreds of years. When Alexis I was emperor there, and there was the great call from the Pope saying, hey, God wills it, let's stop the basically murderous push and oppression of the Muslims across the land. Basically, it was saying, hey, no more, let's go get our lands back. And that was the calling of the First Crusade. However, when the Crusaders showed up, they just butchered everyone in a horrible, heinous manner. And then all the Crusades, like 8 more Crusades that would happen after that, were just military disasters, and they'd start off on one thing and then do horrible atrocities in the others. And what I'd say is the Crusades are what happen when people try to do something in the name of God without actually having any playbook. In the Middle Ages, I believe what happened is we went from this grassroots movement of Christianity where people were suffering and dying, and much of being a Christian meant you're probably going to get tortured and murdered in the first few centuries, and you were super impoverished and hiding from some of these horrible persecutions under Decius, Marcus Aurelius, Valerian, Titus, Nero. All these got Diocletian, and there's all these reign of horrible persecutions. And so literally hundreds of thousands of Christians will be flayed alive, ripped apart. And so that's what it was to be a Christian for a long time, until Rome converted to Christianity. And then all of a sudden the church had power and influence. And now people started wielding the cross not as a symbol of sacrificial service. We love Jesus and we're ready to die for him. Now people started wielding the cross to be able to have power. And some people would do that. Some people remained authentic. But somewhere along the way, in the age of high churchmanship, priests started saying, you know what, this is actually too complicated for you to understand. So we will understand it for you and we'll let you know. And so the Bible was in Latin, and most people in the Middle Ages couldn't read Latin. Most people couldn't even read. And so people didn't actually have any real understanding of what God wanted, and they didn't have their Bible. It really wouldn't be until 1517, in the advent of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, where people would get their Bible back in their own language and they could start reading it and be like, wow, we got really off track. And so what I see with the Inquisition and what I see with the Crusades is really bad stuff. Now, a lot of said is about the Inquisitions, and there was some horrible stuff done there. And really, I chalk it all up to biblical illiteracy. If you really knew what Jesus was saying, none of this would happen. Don't take people's Bible away from them. I want to be like Jesus. That's pretty cut and dry simple. And what I didn't notice him doing is burning people at the stake or stacking bodies of people that disagreed with him. He wasn't doing that. So when you do that, you're not following Jesus, right? You may use his name to control people, much as kind of like some of the horrible dictators and fascists of the 20th century would. They'd kind of play that Christian card as if they could control people by it, and then they drop the facade immediately. And what you saw in even just one weekend of Mao Zedong would kill more people than all the Inquisitions put together. So when you think of horrible, murderous Inquisitions, and they were grisly and terrible, they wouldn't compare to what Mao, the atheistic tyrant, would do on a weekend in the 20th century. The 20th century would be the bloodiest century of all human history. Hundreds of millions of people would be murdered. And that's what happens when you literally take religion away. With religion, some people are going to die. Without religion, more people are going to die. And so Either way, it's not as cut and dry, because it's easy to be able to be like, whoa, religion looks dangerous. I'm like, man, there's something even more dangerous, and that's no religion. And so let's just say either way, things are dangerous. But the religion of Mother Teresa wasn't dangerous. She's just an old lady trying to give poor people and little orphans some food. And so as soon as you castigate her under the bus as if she is a great crusader ready to stack bodies, you make a caricature of what Christianity is. Real, real bad. All right, let's see what some other folks are doing. Tyndall got lit up. Yeah, he did. Lots of Christians were absolutely murdered for their beliefs. We got 2,200 people in here, guys. That's not bad. Merry Christmas to all you guys who are joining late. We're talking about the most controversial subject in all human history, Jesus, and why in the world can't you just chat about it without people losing their minds? Inquisition, I just talked about that at all. All right, here, let me go on a rant about the Christ myther stuff. I know that's popped up already as people just saying, hey, it's all stories. And I answered this last night with one of my neighbors, as I had said at the beginning of this video. Some people would say that Christianity was borrowing from ancient pagan deities, and then they just repackaged it as if there's Dionysius or there's Mithra or Osiris or Horus, and I've read the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and I've read all kinds of these just different primary and secondary sources, and so I'm not new to this stuff. I've also read the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century main stuff where we're looking at the Didache or the different apocryphal texts or the church histories of Eusebius, and I'm reading Clement and all kinds of different stuff. So not only have I studied Bible extensively, I've studied the ancient manuscripts as well in the 1st century texts. And so I dorked out on church history for just years, and I really loved it. Now, the reason why the Christ mythers don't hold water, and if you ever look at a Christ myther book, and basically their big argument is Jesus came around and he was just basically the next mythological figure in a long string of deities claiming similar stuff. The reason why you can know this is patently false, other than just looking at the books, these scholars who have no footnotes and no works cited at the end of their book, and beware of new scholarship on stuff that happened 2,020 years ago, especially in the age of fierce narratives. I barely trust our scientists because different scientists say dramatically different stuff, and I'm kind of like, I don't know what to think of any of that stuff. Are these scientists right, or these who are saying the exact opposite stuff? And so historians do the exact same thing, so be very careful who you listen to. So there's Mithra, Osiris, the Horus stuff, and basically over hundreds of years to a couple thousand years before Christ, you have these pagan deities lining up. But then when Jesus hits the scene, something remarkable, something shocking happens. It flips the ancient world on its face. Nobody was trying to make a mass extinction of Mithra's followers. That wasn't happening. These pagan deities, under the age of religious pluralism, were losing steam, and these entities were dying. When Christianity hit the scene, it was explosive growth, and it only can be explosive. It makes no sense that Christianity was just repackaging the same ideas of old paganism. Instead, it had to have had something new and something powerful attached to it for it to be able to spread like wildfire. It makes no sense. I have a bunch of ideas out there. I copy everyone else's idea, and somehow it splits the world in two, and everyone wants to kill me over it. Absolutely not. And Christianity hits the scene, says stuff that no one's ever heard before, and then what happens is all these ancient pagan dying entities start copying Christianity, and so whenever you look of anything where it's a big similarity between Dionysius and Jesus, look very carefully at when those texts were written, and they're always written hundreds of years after, and they put it in as if they were always doing it all along. And that's basically them just copying some of the stuff so that they could pump some life into what's going on as well. And I'd also point out, Mithra wasn't a historical person. When you look at all these things, it's more ethereal. They're nebulous. They're gods in the sky. Jesus was here physically on earth. Any historian that says Jesus wasn't an actual historical person is committing academic suicide. It's like even notable scholars, secular scholars, the most famous of all time, like Michael Grant or Will Durant, who absolutely weren't evangelical Christians by any means, or in fact against it, wouldn't for a moment entertain a historian saying that Jesus wasn't a real historical person. He was a real dude. The big question was he just a man, or was he actually who he claimed to be, and that is God stepping out of heaven and becoming a man to meet us where we are, die in our place so that we could be reconciled to God. And that's what it is. That's where I put all of my faith and all of my trust. I really think that Jesus rose from the dead, died in my place. That's what I actually believe. I'm hanging it all on that. And as a consequence, because my faith is in Jesus, coronavirus doesn't scare me too much. Actually, bullets flying at my head don't scare me too much. If I catch one in the forehead, then I'm going to be with Jesus for all eternity. And it just underscores the point the righteous are as bold as lions. And because in the worst case scenario, I die and go be in paradise with Jesus, I don't think that's a really bad deal. And so I've got this peace and this joy that's not anchored in politicians or even in the long standing of America, the country that I love. So very good. That's what I think. If you disagree, I'm totally cool with that. I don't care. Tomorrow we'll be launching another YouTube video. I'm going to be teaching ready ups. I'll introduce you to our brand new battle gnome. You'll absolutely love them. And I'll go off on a rant on fear that's going to be great. We'll be back to normal programming tomorrow, but I want to talk about this. And I just defy the political correct muzzle that says, nope, you can't talk about it. I'm going to talk about whatever I want. I'm a free man. I'm getting pushed around and bullied a lot. And I want to talk about whatever I want to talk about. That's it. And you don't have to listen. And that's just freedom. You know, that's cool. All right, here's a question. Hold on, let me go. Question. All right, what else? I like this guy. He is a goofy butt, says Bite. Well, thanks, man. That's cool. Here, let me rant a little bit about Jesus and why he's actually a really big deal for me personally. And I think people who really just read parts of the Bible but don't understand it in the context of the full really misunderstand Jesus. Jesus was God. He created the world. So he was always existed in the Trinity before time began. I think it makes great logical sense that there is a God. I don't think it's logically tenable to say there is no God, because you'll end up in an infinite regress as the natural always proceeds from the natural. And ultimately, you have to say something natural just always existed, which defies everything we know about the scientific order now. And so something always had to have existed, right? And so if you have creation, you must logically have a creator. If you have design, you must have a designer. If you have moral law, you must have a moral law giver. And so I don't think it's very logically tenable. This is why a lot of your physicists on college campuses, even today, believe in some intelligent designer, whereas a lot of biologists who are kind of looking under the microscope will be atheistic. It's really shocking. But look to the physics department when they are really looking at the cosmology, how it all began, and they realize you need some unmoved mover, some supernatural force to cause the natural universe to begin. To say the natural universe caused itself is akin to saying you could father your own self. And you can't do that. The universe can't cause the universe, because the universe would always have to exist to be able to cause itself to exist. It'd have to already exist. You end up with a self-licking ice cream cone. You can't do that logically. Now, some scientists like Stephen Hawking will try to buy their way out with jargon, and they'll kind of say, well, there was nothing. But when they say nothing, they don't mean nothing. They mean like the nothing was pregnant and teeming with lots of something. And then that something, inflation, pop, and then you have the expansion of the universe, Big Bang, whatever. And I think God spoke and bang, it happened. But you have to have that Aristotelian unmoved mover, something that causes it all. Whether it's multiverse or whether it's just our universe, you have to have a supernatural entity. Now, where did God come from? God doesn't need an origin. That's the definition of supernatural, meaning it can just always exist. That's what super, outside of, above the natural order even means. So I think it's very logical to have a God. Sorry, that was a little bit of a tirade, but I get that all the time, and atheists don't really understand the argument and the devastating weakness of their point of view. They just like to declare victory and be like, ha, God is not a man with a beard in the sky. And it's kind of like they think that's somehow a good argument. It's as if I'm trying to play chess with an atheist. They advance one pawn and say, checkmate. And I'm like, dude, you have no idea where I'm going. You've never even seen these moves, though they've been around for hundreds of years. We just got fat and lazy in our universities as we've been indoctrinated to a specific narrative, and you haven't heard stuff like the cosmological argument, which I just gave, the axiological argument, the teleological arguments, all the arguments for the existence of God. Anyway, there you go. But I wanted to talk about Jesus real quick and why he's such an instrumental figure in my life. And people see the gentle, loving Jesus, and that's a good thing. You know, that Jesus was loving and sacrificial, but there was also something more to that. Before Jesus came to earth, he was in glory. This is the one who throws Satan headlong from heaven like a lightning bolt. He was there on the fields of battle with Gideon steamrolling enemies. He's there leading the charge on the gates of Jericho when an angelic army led by Jesus, the commander of the Lord's army, kicks over the walls of Jericho. And this is evidenced in Joshua 5 and 6, where the commander of the Lord's army, that's Jesus, from Revelation 19, the great war captain, Jesus, is there. Anyway, and Jesus is also coming back in Revelation 19 to have the war that ends all wars. This is the apocalypse. This is the battle of Armageddon and the fields of Megiddo, where Jesus, the conquering warrior king, comes back. Now, we see a different Jesus in the New Testament, and that's because he had a very specific mission. Here, basically what Jesus does is he strips armor, sword, and shield, leaves it in heaven, comes vulnerably onto earth, right? And by way of a rescue mission. It's rescue mission. And he is on a very razor sharp specific mission to come, love us, woo us to himself, die, rise again, and then put back on that armor. But don't miss the fact that the great war captain is clothed in glory, and he's strong and he's fierce. And that's ever so much a part of Jesus, the man who's being tortured to death, and where you and I would cry out, he wouldn't. He was a tougher man than I ever will be. And so that's the great war captain, Jesus. You have moments in the New Testament where all of a sudden that facade, the gentle lamb, all of a sudden breaks free in like a transfiguration, and all of a sudden they see lion and everyone freaks out in terror. And when demons are confronted with him, they freak out in terror as well, because they recognize that this is the lion of the tribe of Judah. We see the lamb, but heaven sees the lion, and that's how he dwells forever. So anyway, I see the great war captain Jesus, who loves and is vulnerable and kind and gentle, and is also fierce and ferocious. And then when you think about warrior poet, really, it's just a great understanding of biblical masculinity. That's it. That's it. Though, I'll also say there's great folks that were not Jesus-following people, like Leonidas or Deinachus, and you have these, ancient personages that flipped or that fit the warrior poet bill. Even some of the samurai, right, who certainly aren't Jesus followers. Warrior poet just means live for higher purpose, ready to sacrifice in the defense of others, and that's a good thing, right? And you don't have to join my personal little Sunday school class to be a warrior poet. We are not a Christian movement. We're extremely wide. I happen to be a very outspoken Christian, but Warrior Poet Society is not a Christian movement. I just happen to be a Christian, as somebody helped leading you down the trail, right? All right, very good. Let's jump back into some questions here. Just a bunch of real random stuff. Somebody mentioned Merry Christmas, Appendix Carrie Bear. Merry Christmas to you as well. All right, here's Travis says, for someone wanting to learn more about Jesus/God, what would you recommend? I've never been to a church and that didn't feel hypocritical or fake, and the Bible is hard to read. Well, one thing is get an easier Bible to read. Like if you pick up something that was written like the 1611 King James, that was written for a very different, that was written for people who spoke very differently. And so it was great, but even the King James Version has been revised and updated many, many, many times. I would recommend getting something like an NIV. This is an ESV, English Standard Version, and it's in just plain language. And so it's really, really easy to understand. And I'd also recommend that you start in the New Testament. The New Testament starts with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. So start there and read through, and that'd be a real good place to start. As far as Christians being hypocritical, you got us. Because the standard's perfection. Jesus just kind of nonchalantly drops this on us. He says, all right, guys, be perfect like me. I'm like, oh, great, fantastic. The problem is the more I try to be like Jesus, the more I realize I'm just nothing like him. Just nothing like him. I'm temperamental, and I get impatient with my wife and kids, and I'm selfish, and I'm trying to grow and be a more thoughtful and giving and loving person, more patient, but also stronger and bolder and more fearless, which are every bit as Christian attributes as the other. We just live in a sissified age where we major on the kindness and the meekness and the love and the giving without the bold tenacity, the masculine elements there of being strong and courageous, which we're commanded to do over and over, right? And so when we take certain attributes of Christ and elevate them and ignore others, we make a cartoon of Jesus, and it's awful. It's terrible. And so when I first came to saving faith, in 2001, kind of around the time I'm entering the military, I looked at the church and it just looked so, let's see, it looked like a Thomas Kincaid painting. It looked like a bunch of fluffy potpourri, and I'm kind of like, I want some men to follow around here. Where's the men? Still, we're kind of at that crisis, and they're there. It's just, you got to seek them out, and some churches have a better culture that'll fit you better than others. And so I would church shop, find something that feels a little bit more at home. Don't go to a church thinking that everyone's going to be perfect. No one is. Everyone's learning and growing, but they're flawed, right? So I would just encourage you. The church is a family. It's a hospital of sinners, and so you're going to find hypocrisy there. You're going to find hypocrisy with me. I'm just going to kind of own it of like, yep, here's the deal, bro. I'm trying to be like Jesus. I'm nothing like him. I suck. I'm sorry. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to be better. I'm going to let Jesus change me from the inside out. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just not where I want to be. I'm still growing into the man I'm supposed to be. And so when the charge is Christians aren't perfect, I'm like, man, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I'm super guilty too. So, all right. What else? All right. Okay. Here's James Rass is asking a great question. What's your opinion on who and or what is God? Everyone calls God by a different name. So this gets into something like universalism. And the idea is, well, everyone has their different expression of who God is. And you know what? We're all right. And that's so palatable, especially today in the age of postmodernism. We'd love to imagine that everyone's right. But what this is the departure of an absolute truth. Let me cut to the chase, guys. There is absolute truth. To say there's not absolute truth is claiming an absolute truth, namely, there is no absolute truth. And so it's a self-defeating argument. I say, there's no such thing as absolute truth. And someone could say, are you absolutely sure? And then you say, yes, I'm absolutely sure. And then you realize you just expressed an absolute truth, that there is no absolute truth, meaning it's a self-defeating argument to say there is no real truth. There has to be. It's just the basic laws of logic. And all of human history bowing to the laws of logic, understanding in the simple things like the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle. It's just basic logic. And now we're such dummies, we've given up on logic, which is a self-defeating argument. You can't do that. And as soon as you do it, you start undoing education. We're in the age of deconstructionism. And what that means is we're basically looking at everything we figured out and we really know, all the stuff that's traditional and good, stuff like, hey, a thing is itself and it can't be not itself, law of identity. Or, two opposite things are opposite things. Law of non-contradiction. So I'm trying to put it in layman's, and I'm actually doing great injustice to the laws of logic, which I know pretty darn well because I've studied logic extensively. But we're dismissing in one wide sweep logic. And what for? It's because our little Marxist camps we call universities have literally given up on truth, and now it becomes something ambiguous, and we're just saying, hey, whatever's your truth is great. That's fine. And it feels great, but it's just absolutely asinine thinking. Truth, by definition, guys, it must be narrow and exclusive. That's what truth is. So when I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, that is a very specific truth claim. 2 plus 2, it equals 4, not 3, not 5. And someone could challenge me and say, well, that seems very arrogant and that seems very close-minded. What about the other infinite amount of numbers? Is it fair to say that only 4 is the right answer? And so basically that's a picture to what people are doing with who God is. Here's the options. Either there is no God. That's a logical option. Or there is a God. It's one of those two, right? It can't be both, right? So when all the religions disagree with each other and you say, hey, all of them are right, well, basically you're engaging in saying the law of non-contradiction is not a real law of logic. Who cares about logic? It's just bad thinking, and you couldn't get away with it in any other time except now, where we've literally, as postmoderns, given up on the nature of truth. And it's going to be the death of us. It's absolutely terrible. I'm going to train my sons to actually embrace things like logic. But we can be tolerant and loving, you know, as well. But that doesn't mean abandoning logic. That's terrible thinking. So when we apply the same thing, 2 plus 2 equals 4, not 3, not 5, or not any of the infinite numbers. Similarly, when it comes to God, either there is a God or there is not a God. Now, if there is a God, God is going to think certain ways and not others. And this is just applying logic to God. If God is God, God created the universe in an ordered way, which means God is authorizing logic. That's what logic is the understanding of who God is and how God constructed the universe. So a God that constructs a comprehensible universe is himself comprehensible. Understand? That's how he's doing it. As Corinthians 14 says, God is not a God of confusion, but of order. And this is actually an argument for the existence of God. The only way that we can be sure there is such a thing as logic, this is called the transcendent argument, meaning if for us to trust logic, there must be a God who is creating and authorizing the laws of logic, which is really, really cool. And so logic and God aren't antithetical. It's actually one proceeds from the other. We have logic because God is logical, right? So you can't have all religions be the same, right? It's the law of non-contradiction, right? And excluded middle. So anyway, either Jesus is the way or Jesus is not the only way. Jesus claimed, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father apart from me. Now, if God steps into human history, and it is the person of Jesus, it's that. God stepped in. He didn't step in as Buddha. He stepped in as Jesus. That's it. Now, if you're Spanish and you call him Jesus, or he appears to someone behind the Iron Curtain, you know, back in the day in China, and they don't actually know his name, but it is still the person of Jesus and it comes through. But Mithra or Dionysius, who's absolutely wildly different idea, it's not actually the same person. That is not the way, the truth, and the life. And it seems awful, but 2 plus 2, it equals 4. Truth is narrow and exclusive. And the moment we start bending logic to suit what we'd like it to be and what feels tolerant, we start allowing our feelings, emotions to dictate actual truth and logic. And that's not a way to arrive at a truth. That's a way to arrive at a narrative. And I want truth. I want truth. I want to really know. If I'm wrong, I want it to be evident. I want to see it, right? I want logic. I want evidence. And that's how I arrived at Christian faith as well. All right, what else, guys? We're 39 minutes in. We got over 3,000 people in here. A lot of people are probably bailing and unsubscribing because you are dainty and made of glass. We'll be back to gun content tomorrow. You know, we're launching a video. It'll be fantastic. So, logic can't prove faith. Here's a good thing. So if you look in the book of Acts, The Apostle Paul is arguing all the time with whether it's the great Grecians at the Areopagus, the most sophisticated minds on the planet. He would always say, hey, let's reason together. And then he'd give a defense, apologia. It means a defense of what he was saying. And he would say he would meet daily in the hall of Tyrannus, proving that these things were so. And so people have made this jump, and it happened back in like the 1700s with existentialism and Soren Kierkegaard as we started to think of faith as a blind leap, like a coin toss, and that's not faith at all. Hebrews 11 says faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And the Bible doesn't ask you to come to Jesus or any of its truths by a blind, unseeing faith. Faith is attached to an object, and it's reasonable as we're commanded to be open to reason. There's a great website called reasonablefaith.org, led by William Lane Craig. And reasonablefaith.org basically is tying these things together. And like, no. Christianity, if true, should be reasonable. If truth is really true, the science should meet experience and history and mathematics, and all the stuff comes together and kisses to agree in this centralized truth. And this is called a world view, where all the pieces fit. This type of knowledge and all this data, which is very, very readily available to you, has just been lost. It's just not being taught. Guys, listen to me. Some of the most educated, brilliant men in the world are Christians or believe in a God. Maybe not a Christian per se, but they believe in an intelligent designer. They're right now. No one sticks a microphone under their nose so that you can hear them, but you can literally look them up on YouTube directly after this. I can just go on with all these PhDs. For every one of you who mentions a Richard Dawkins or a Lawrence Krauss, I can give you 10 people who are Christians or at least intelligent design advocates who have just as good of a resume or even better, whether it's John Lennox or Dr. Alistar McGrath or Dr. I was going to say William Lane Craig, but he's not in the science camp. Ian Hutchinson, Hugh Ross, David Berlinski, Jonathan Wells, Michael Behe. Anyway, I'm just kind of rattling them off the Robert T Bakker, the dinosaur expert. These are some of the most brilliant minds in the world. You just don't know any of them. They're there. You can listen. They're alive right now. Alistar McGrath, I just mentioned, he's from Oxford. Right now, he's debated Richard Dawkins. He didn't do very well because he's not a good debater, but he is in the written word, and his education is absolutely astounding. He's also an Anglican priest, but he's a professional historian, philosopher. He's an actual scientist as well, meaning he's got PhDs in all of them, all of it. And so it's just incredible. Dr. Ian Hutchinson is the dean of the nuclear engineering department at MIT right now. And he talks about Jesus all the time. You can find him on YouTube. He's an Aussie with a fun accent. But he's a professor at MIT and has been for ages. Loves Jesus. And so it's amazing how many of these brilliant men believe that God created the universe. These are not junior varsity guys. This is ever so bit as impressive resume as any atheist you can find, or much better. I can find even greater ones. And so the problem is nobody has any idea that these guys even exist. My big problem whenever I debate an atheist is they've never heard any of my arguments. And I'm kind of like, well, what in the world are we doing at universities other than literally propagating one single narrative without ever even telling the other side? This is my big beef right now with like CNN or something. If like I know exactly your worldview or your political slants and how woke you are based on just what news you watch. If you just watch CNN and that's all you watch, I know exactly what you're going to come up with. I'd probably come up with similar ideas if that's all the news I got. But when I watch different news channels, I see literally the same story spun such wildly different ways that it's all just narrative driven and I don't trust it. Similarly, this has been done with Jesus and it's been happening for a long time, meaning people don't actually know anything about Jesus or the logical defenses for the Christian worldview. And it's really, really sad. It's really unfortunate. So there you go. Ever met Jeff? Somebody just asked if I have ever met Jeff Strouker. Jeff is a pastor down in Columbus, Georgia. I have. He was my pastor. He was my chaplain when I was at 2nd Ranger Battalion. And so I went to combat with him. I remember before we were going out on this raid, it was night, we had our nods flipped up, and he gathered all these Rangers together for a huddle, and he wanted to have a moment of prayer with us. This is a real fun story. You guys will love this. And so Jeff Strouker, by the way, this guy was in Mogadishu, Somalia in a shootout. So this is a legendary Ranger. Right? Legendary Ranger, Jeff Strouker, but he became my chaplain later on. And so he bands us all together. And by the way, most Rangers are not Christians by any means. I was one of the only real ones. There's just a few of us, barely. Out of my platoon of about 40, there was kind of like 3 that were really kind of living the deal. But before you go out and possibly get in a gunfight, everyone gets real spiritual. Nobody's upset about praying before this mission. But this chaplain, Jeff Strouker, he prays like this. I wonder if he even remembers this. I'm going to ask him. But we bow our heads. I remember one line, and everyone's kind of closing eyes. And Jeff says, "And Lord, may we just bathe in the blood of our enemies tonight." And I kind of look up and look around, and everyone else is doing that too. And they're like, "Is it okay to pray that?" And I don't know if it is or not, but he did. And I thought that was super funny. So some of y'all think I'm terrible, but these are the guys, these are terrorists who are throwing acid on women and raping children and killing people. And so I made lots of friends with like our interpreters, and we'd sit down for tea time in different villages with Afghanis and Iraqis, and I really made some friends. I thought there were some really neat Afghani and Iraqi people, and I really liked them. I just had a beef with the people that tried to shoot me. So, the goal is to shoot them back or shoot them first. So, anyway, someone just asked what makes the grass grow, and the answer is blood, blood, blood. That's an old tip of the cap to basic training stuff. What are your views on Catholics? I like Catholics. I see, one family of faith. Jesus has one bride, and so the differences in denominations, they're really, really small. So within Protestantism, that's Episcopalian or Baptist or Methodist or Pentecostal or non-denominational or Anglican or whatever. It doesn't matter. All of that's in one family of faith. It's called Christianity. And the difference is, it's like Methodists think that you want to sprinkle some water on on somebody when they get baptized, and the Baptists think you got to do a full dunk. And you're like, that's it. I'm kind of like, that's kind of it. And everything else is more church to church cultural differences, but within their articles and statement of faith, it's really almost all these denominations incredibly the same. Catholicism has some deep differences, and so Catholics I usually take on a case-by-case basis. There's some things I really love about Catholicism, and there's some stuff I really absolutely do not. We have a lot of our society folks that are Catholics. I had one in class, and he was a Catholic priest, and he was in my a pistol or a rifle class. And whenever we weren't teaching, we were in an aside, and we were in this theological debate. We had a circle of students around us. Everyone was having a good time, but we were both trying to convert each other. He said, "John, you'd make such a good Catholic." And I'm like, "You'll never get me, bro, but watch me make you a Protestant." And so we just went back and forth. It was a really fun time, and I loved him. I thought he was an absolutely awesome guy. So we got on really well. Very good. That's, all right, what else? Miss Poet, what do you think? Here's a question. So somebody just asked, Gabriel just said, question, when should Christians resort to violence to defend the nation and others? What's the red line? We love not by the sword, but we should have one. Modern Christianity is very pacifistic. This requires a lot of caution. I think about this all the time. In this video, in the description, preparing for this, I posted a link down below. So everybody check the description right now. And what you'll see is a blog I wrote. This is one of the very first blogs I ever put on the website. And I got the question so much, I wanted to really give a good explanation. And the blog is called, Is Killing a Sin? And I answered that in a blog, and I have scriptural support as well as philosophical support for when it is okay to kill. Now, I'd also be very careful to say everyone has a different calling. If you're called to be a soldier and you're a Christian, well, you're still called to be a defender of the weak and innocent. And that is a godly attribute. This is in Exodus 16 or 17. It's one of those two chapters. God calls himself a warrior. He says, I, the Lord, am a warrior, a dread warrior. And we realize that Jesus was warrior before and warrior after he came to earth to die for us. So he put the warrior sword aside for that very specific mission, but he picks the sword back up after ascension. And so recognize there is definitely, as Ecclesiastes 3 will say, there's a time for peace and a time for war. There's a time to build up and a time to destroy, a time to kill and a time to heal. And so there's a time for both. And what I can't give is a turnkey and say, this is what the Bible says about always doing something. I think everyone needs to critique where they're at. Some of y'all will play the martyr. Some of y'all are called to be martyrs, and some of you are called to be defenders. And so everyone's got to figure out exactly what God is calling them to be. But I know that God calls us to, as far as it is with you, do your best to live at peace with everyone. You know, and I think that's the whole deal. If I don't want violence, I don't want to hurt anyone. But if ISIS would like to come over and start killing innocent people, well, I have something to do about that. And I'm called to be a protector in that way. And so when it's real cut and dry, it's definitely time. When it's not, I would rather err on the side of peace and love and kindness. But remember, we're also protectors. Some of us are called to be physical protectors of the innocent. And so I do not want to shirk that responsibility. It's part of why I carry every day when I go out in public. Yesterday I was at Walmart, and I one of you guys approached me. I love meeting warrior poets in the wild. Every time I go out now, I pretty much get recognized. Make sure if you ever see me in the wild, you say hello. I actually like that. I like getting to know you a bit. But I asked him, are you carrying? And the reason why I carry isn't because I am fearful that someone's going to take my life. It's almost always, I feel guilty when I don't carry because I know I'm called to be a protector. I'm skilled to be a protector. That's in my background. It's in my blood. I'm supposed to protect. I love people, and so love protects. And so that's how I personally am called to be. And so I carry a gun, not for me, but what if something went down on my watch? I want to be able to stand in the gap, meet evil face to face, as God's people have done many, many, many times in the Old Testament and have since the New Testament as well, right? The faith that Jesus praised most in the New Testament was the faith of the centurion. And when soldiers came to John the Baptist, they said, hey, what should we do to follow the Lord? And he didn't say stop soldiering. It's an honorable profession to bear the sword or the gun in defense of others. And that could be, you know, whether it's a cop or a military dude or a civilian as well. Absolutely. There are defenders. And so there you go. Let's see. Someone asked me if I'm carrying right now. I am in my home, and my Belgian Malinois is on duty right now, and I got our alarms and stuff of literally, if you got anywhere near my house, my phone's going to send me an alert. I'll see it right here on screen. And so no, I'm chilling. My doors are locked. I got my braces on. And Miss Poet, you're on the scene. Miss Poet's ready. She's ready. So no, I'm not carrying right now. And I'm also trying to avoid touching stuff. I've got my thumb all jacked up. That's 8 stitches. We were doing a fight scene on top of a cliff for our Warrior Poet Society network. We have a show on our network called War Poet. Really great show. You'd absolutely love it. I'd have you in stitches too because it's so funny. But anyway, we were filming a fight scene on top of a cliff for that. And then they kicked me off the cliff. Literally, I get kicked off a cliff. And the producers couldn't find like just an actual like fake it cliff. It was over 100-foot straight down drop over jagged rocks. And so I was tied in. We're faking the fight scene. And then when it's time to kick me off, we tied me in and literally kicked me off. And I had probably about an 8 to 10 foot sheer drop before the rope actually caught me. But anyway, I jacked up my thumb. Pretty fun stuff. This is true. I've had a lifelong dream to sew myself up. I know your dreams are different. Mine are weird because I'm a psychopath. Yeah, I've always wanted to. Miss Poet just said, really? I'm like, yeah. So yeah, it's been a goal of mine. I used to be really into rock climbing. And every time I went rock climbing, I would have my medical gear. I'm an EMT as well. And so I just like medical stuff. But I always had a suture kit, and I didn't want to fall, obviously. But if I did get a bad cut, I wanted to be able to sew myself up because it sounds super hardcore. Anyway, I got to sew this 7th stitch, and then Evan sewed this 8th stitch. And so anyway, I sewed myself up, and I feel pretty good about that. Didn't tickle, but there you go. All right, we're at 55 minutes. I'm gonna go 1 hour even, and so I'm looking through the last questions here. Can we see the puppy? Nope, she's in heat right now, so she's bleeding on my floor. I'm trying to keep her off the carpet. All right, guys. Still looking. Somebody just asked, hey, one of my favorite philosophical topics is predestination and free will. Can you talk about arguments for and against predestination and how free will can exist with an omniscient God? Predestination basically means it is predestined, pre-decided. And what I don't have time to do in the next few minutes is really jump in hardcore to this discussion and do all the pros and cons, but I can kind of set the stage in a way that'll make this whole conversation and diatribe a little more palatable so that you can be more comfortable in the mystery of it all. I see God. If God is God, then God precedes time. God always was, which puts God logically outside of time. Now, if God is outside of time and all-knowing and all-powerful, he obviously wouldn't make decisions in a natural time sequential order, being that, you know, time sequence is something that a free will and limited person would go through. That's you and I, right? And so I move stuff around. This happened, then this happened. There's an order of events. But God, outside of time, there's no real order of events from his perspective. The world is just being created to God, and it's here now, in our time now, and it's an eternity future for God, all at the same time. And so you understand, for God, how could God not predestine? How could it possibly be that not a sparrow falls to the ground apart from the will of my Father? And that word predestination, it's all over the Bible. It's all over the Bible. In fact, the Bible presupposes one thing. It presupposes free will. As if we don't have free will, then if there's no real free will, then God has manufactured evil, is directly responsible for it, and now we can charge God with wrongdoing. If there is free will, and somehow God predestines at the same time, now we can be culpable for actual evil, and God is still on his throne being powerful, not just knowing the future, but bringing about a plan. And so it is logically possible for both to exist. There's also a new kid on the block, newer, called Molinism, which really does a real cool thing dealing with middle knowledge to express how these things can exist at the same time. So there's the more Calvinistic approach, which is God predestines, absolutely. And we do also have free will. It's 100% both, not 50-50. They just exist in different realms. God predestining happens before the creation of the world, and it happens outside of time. Free will happens from our perspective inside time in a time sequence. And so comparing the two isn't a fair comparison because it looks like a contradiction. It really is just a paradox, as they're in two different planes of ontology, one outside of time, one inside of time. So when you compare them, it's not apples to apples. It's not even apples to oranges. It looks more like apples to a metaphor. So you just can't get there from there. Someone just said taxation is theft. I'm going to give you a big salute there. If y'all saw the stimulus bill that was just vetoed by Trump, it was just filled with all this crap. $1 billion to reconstruct the closed Kennedy Center, $25 million for gender programs in Pakistan, $1 billion for Egypt, $1.3 billion for Egypt. We're giving billions of dollars away to foreign countries in the name of COVID relief. And when you divide up the tax bill, $900 billion, it should be almost about $3,000 per person, but instead we get $600 per person. If you're under 75K is what you meant. It's like just such absolute, I'm getting pushed around. I'm pretty ticked about it. I'm pretty upset about what my tax dollars are going to and anti-Second Amendment stuff. And so anyway, I'm trying to kind of stay on message here and be like, hey, listen, guns and gun culture and freedom, but man, all this stuff is forcing me to become a more political animal, and I'm more of a philosophical and theological animal. So I stay at the presuppositional level, knowing that your theology and philosophy ultimately drives the thing that politics will be. Your politics are basically going to be decided by those roots growing out. So I'd rather deal with the presuppositional roots, and that's where I go. So anyway, guys, we're sorry for the little rant, but it's live, and so I get to just screw it. I'm going to talk about whatever I want. And for you guys who have been hanging out with me on this Christmas Eve morning, thanks so much for tuning in. I had a great time just talking about what I think, and understand that I'm on a journey. I haven't arrived. I'm still learning and growing, and I'm excited for what I'm going to figure out in the future. But for now, this is where I'm at my journey. And thanks so much for having a good chat without getting deeply offended because you're all made of glass. You champions hung in there because you're not made of glass. You're able to be open to reason even when we disagree. I dig that. I like the disagreement, because through our disagreement, our arguments will get stronger, and we might just happen to stumble over a little bit more truth. And that's pretty cool. So guys, I love you. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Put on your elf costume.
I'm not putting on my elf costume. I'm not doing it.
Do it.
She's telling me to go put my elf costume on. I'm not doing it.
Do it.
Guys, Merry Christmas to all of you. Go spend some time with family. See you guys.